Have things been less busy since in the past week?
Not really.
Really? A lot of events still?
Yeah, a lot of events still relating to not just my book, but I'm still doing talks on other things, other issues outside of the political things, and plus I had like hadith class.
Mm.
I have a Sierra class that I teach here at a local masjid, so it's still things. Plus
Yeah,
my care Michigan works too.
it's a interesting time. I mean, California, it kind of went backwards. Everything went back to square one. So we're the measures were planning to open up. Everything was opening up the past week, and now we're pretty much reversing, planning to close down again.
Yeah, I think the same thing is going to happen here. I've given khutbah. I'm scheduled to give it this Friday. I gave it a couple of weeks ago, but cases are starting to slowly rise back here too. So I wouldn't be surprised within a couple of weeks that we go back to the Ramadan program of not having prayer in Jama'ah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I throw out the idea of hazmat suits, but I don't know if that, I don't think people really want to wear those things.
No, that's too much.
Yeah. So I'm gonna okay. So I'm gonna make it live right now, and we have some attendees here already. So
Okay.
I'm gonna make it live on Facebook. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Jazakallah khair to everyone for joining us today for our program with Imam Dawud Walid. Our program today is about sacred activism and the concept of really framing our references and our ideals and our thoughts in the space in the realm of social justice within Islamic principles. Imam Dawud Walid is the director of CARE Michigan, and he's the author of many books, but one of his most popular books on this subject is Towards Sacred Activism, which is on the subject of Islamic principles and social justice. And without further ado, we're going to have Imam Dawood talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll allow for a Q&A.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه الراشدين وبعد. First of all, thank you to the Shura Council for inviting me on to discuss this topic, which has been relevant for a while, but I think takes on more significance in this particular time as there continue to be protests throughout these United States of America as it pertains to systemic anti-Black racism that is going on in this country for over 400 years, and which one of its ugly manifestations is extrajudicial killings by law enforcement. And we saw one of countless situations that have taken place in American history with George Floyd, which sparked national concern and people going to the streets. And now we have Confederate statues being torn down and other things going on. So in this very brief time that we have, and I encourage you to purchase the book Towards Sacred Activism if you have not already, as well as a podcast that Sheikh Omar Suleiman and I did on this subject that was just released this morning by Muslim Matters. We did it a few days ago. It was released this morning, where it's more of a in-depth conversation. But the issue for the day and for Muslims isn't whether activism is permissible or not. I think that that is, overall, Muslims would agree that we should be involved in enjoying the good and forbidding the evil within inside of our society, and we cannot be silent spectators or be apathetic in terms of promoting good standards and justice and being against immorality and injustice. I don't think that's really a discussion for most of our community anymore these days. I think that the part that we need to focus on as Muslims is what type of activism, like what motivates the activism and what are those parameters. Hence, the term sacred, in which I have used, I believe is very fundamental in our viewpoint of how we look at activism in the American context, and especially in these particular days and times. We're talking about a racial justice, but it could apply to other forms of seeking justice, be it environmental justice, it could be justice relating to foreign policy issues as well. So our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "El mu'minu a'zamu hurmatan min al-Ka'bah," that the believer in his or her magnificence and importance is more sacred than the Kaaba itself. There's two different wordings of narrations, two different wordings in prophetic narrations in terms of this. But I want to focus on the word hurma, which means sacred. And hurma linguistically is related to the word haram, right? So haram, we know we have is certain precincts, and al masjid al-haram is the most sacred masjid to us according to Islamic belief. So the haram and masjid al-haram, if we can give an example, all of these are linguistically connected. So when we're talking about a haram, there's certain precincts or certain parameters of that which we should have a heightened consciousness about what we are doing, what we should do, what we should refrain from, and then also the ways in which we go about doing what we should do, right? There should be a heightened consciousness. And within the haram, the haram is not, those precincts that are sacred, they're not set just by whims or just by feelings. That which is sacred in the haram itself, like al-Masjid al-Haram, is Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal, who is the one who defined the sacredness of those precincts, of those parameters, right? So hence, when I'm using this term and talking about sacred activism, that the first objective or the first goal in our activism is actually Almighty God, Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So this is the first. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawamina lillahi shuhada'a bil qist, right? So Allah Azza wa Jal gives the command, "Oh, those who believe, be of those who stand up, serve and stand up for Allah, witnesses bil qist, witnesses for justice, witnesses for equity." So the ultimate objective is Almighty God. Then we have that which is the goal, is that we would be seeking justice. So within that framework, if with any situation, the first standard that we should be using is that which we can safely believe is going in accordance with that which is pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jalla. And that is what we should be advocating for as that objective, right? And also, in regards to that objective that we are trying to reach, as far as bringing injustice or being against injustice, then also the ends don't justify the means. So for us as Muslims, we are a people that should be interested not just in substance, but also form. And we just don't see it, the ends justify the means. So if we are doing our activism, and Almighty Allah is the ultimate objective, He's the ultimate goal, that we're trying to reach His rida, His felicity, and His pleasure, then the goal isn't the only thing that's important or should be sacred, but the means that we use, the strategies that we use should also be sacred. And this also relates to the etiquettes or the comportment that we use, or what we would call adab, and how we seek to meet those objectives, right? And thus we have the Quran is our first place of return of how we learn about these goals, and that which is pleasurable to Allah Azza wa Jal, and that which is displeasurable that we should stay away from. Then as-sunnatun nabawiyyah, then the prophetic way of our beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, right? And then also we also use the ijma', or the consensus of what the learned of this ummah have always agreed upon, in particular when it comes to morality, right? That's what we should hold on to, and that's not the point of departure, that we should give up and surrender our morality, right, in the cause of seeking justice and seeking change, right? And then we look to the best of examples. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, that we look to the Messenger of God, salawatullahi wasalamuhu alayhi, as that example, and we look to his way of how he conducted himself under times of dhulm, how he instructed his Sahaba to behave in times of fighting injustice, including themselves when they were mazlumin or mustadafin, when they also were oppressed and marginalized, not just simply when they were in a state of where they had some sort of political power or political control. So when I'm talking about sacred activism, this is what I'm referring to. Now, another important part, and there's more I could talk about. I mean, the book talks about spiritual self-care, which is a very important issue, and I think that is worthy of its own talk. But when we're talking about sacred activism, and activism falling under the framework of al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahyi anil munkar, of enjoying the good and forbidding the evil, that one of the prerequisites of enjoining good and forbidding evil, as our scholars of usul have taught us, is that one must have knowledge of good and evil, right? So there's certain prerequisites in order to be involved in this activism. Also, our scholars have said that it is not permissible for anyone to proceed in an endeavor until they learn or they know the ruling of Allah pertaining to it. I will repeat that again. La yajuz is not proper, it is not permissible for anyone to proceed in a matter without learning or without knowing the ruling of Allah pertaining to it, right? So that means that there needs to be some prerequisite knowledge, that we are not a people just simply of emotions. We just don't go by the winds of emotions with our activism, right? That we need to have some knowledge, and not just dunyawi knowledge or knowledge of political events, but we need knowledge in usul and some very basic principles. And the branches of these particulars are important to know, but they're not as important as the usul or the basis. So we need to have basic knowledge in the epistemology or framework of how we judge good and evil, and also how we should go about some sort of bringing about some permissible social change or transformation. How do we go about doing that according to a sacred paradigm, not a profane paradigm, not a nihilistic paradigm, not by a paradigm that think the ends justify the means, or we're going to do this and that just out of political expediency. That's not the way of our Prophet alayhi salam, and his pious companions. That is not their way, that is not their methodology. And if we want success and we want Allah's help, then we have to have a methodology and have some knowledge, right? And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, and if God assists you, if God helps you, then none can defeat you. But as a good friend of mine, Dr. Bilal Ware, who teaches in University of Southern California, Santa Barbara, says that if we as Muslims, we just want to do it our own way, and we abandon the Quran and the Sunnah in our methodology, and he said basically we're on our own. If we're on our own for our own devices, then we shouldn't even expect Allah's help. And if we if we think we can have any sort of successful social transformation in a real healthy way without Allah's nusra, then he said, well, good luck with that, meaning that's a ludicrous proposition for anyone who believes, who's a believer in Islam. I don't mean just simply being a Muslim as some sort of quasi-ethnic identity or some sort of quasi-social political identity that is irreverent towards our sacred tradition. So I would end with this other point, that when we're talking about coalitions, there's a difference between the language, in my mind, between allies and coalition partners. Those who are involved in allyship, they are starting from a certain position or a certain place, right? And they hold on to certain transcendent beliefs and transcendent values that then guides them towards objectives, right? People who are in coalition can start from different places, and they may agree on certain objectives, endpoint, but they're starting from different places. And those same people who are in coalition with each other, they may be adversaries to each other in other issues. I'm talking about clear issues. Because why? Because they don't hold the same transcendent values. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions this in Surah Al-Ma'idah. This is a way that we as Muslims should cooperate with each other, right? And our wala, our allyship, is supposed to be with us as believers, right? We have a spiritual allyship with each other. المؤمنون مؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر ويقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة ويطيعون الله ورسوله أولئك سيرحمهم الله إن الله عزيز حكيم. Right. This ayah is not the one I was referring to. I'll get to the one Surah Al-Ma'idah, the second ayah next. But this ayah, believing men and believing women are allies of one another. They have each other's backs, and they enjoin good. They forbid evil. They establish the prayer. They institute the zakah, and they obey Allah and His Messenger in all other matters. And these people shall receive the mercy of Allah soon. Right, this is what Allah Azza wa Jalla says. So the principle that we have in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the second ayah, وَتَعَوْنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَوْنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Right, so this ayah is a way that we should be working with each other and cooperating with each other, but there's a principle in this that we can apply of dealing with people who aren't on Islam, or actually not operating from Iman, I should say, which is a better way of putting it. Allah Azza wa Jalla gives us two commands: cooperate with one another and assist one another in al-birr wa taqwa. But He says, do not cooperate based upon al-udhm, sinful matters, al-ithm, that which is haram, that which is sinful, wal-udwan, and that which has enmity towards the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jalla, right? So there is no such thing as one of my teachers said, there is no such thing as unconditional allyship, right? We have certain sacred principles that we're supposed to align to. We align to principles over personalities or political parties. This is a point that I'm getting to. And al-bir, our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the hadith is authentic, in a sidqa yahdi ila al-bir, wa in al-birra yahdi ila al-jannah, that truthfulness leads to al-bir. And al-bir is a very comprehensive term that sums up basically all righteous traits of character. Is the best way I can say what bir means. And then all these righteous traits of character, which includes being equitable and just, leads to the paradise. It guides to the paradise. So when we're in coalition with someone, right, that yes, we affirm the truth. We have to start from the truth, but we're not to cooperate or advance anything that we know that is against truth, right? And we have our own standards of truth, right? So there isn't a paradigm for us. There should be no reason for us as Muslims, and we should be very strong in this conviction that just because we enter into a coalition with people, that means that we have to sign on to all of their so-called intersectional agenda, or that we have to use all of their words or their nomenclature, right? That's not what it means to be in coalition. And if anyone demands that from us as Muslims of being part of a coalition, that they want us really to be their servants or be their slaves, right? If we can't have our own independence and our own judgment or basis about how we're going to proceed in trying to find justice or a solution for matters. And if we have to submit to their language or their nomenclature, then they're looking for slaves. And we don't do this. We don't try to impose other people to believe in what we believe and use all of our wording. And we should never allow ourselves to be pushed into that, where we start affirming things or even celebrating things, unfortunately. Like I have seen some Muslim politicians, they start celebrating things that fall under al-ithm, right? That fall under that which Allah clearly has prohibited. He says haram, he said sinful, and yet we feel like we have to so-called be good allies, right? And then we end up being involved in al-amru bil munkar, which Allah Azza wa Jal says something very strong about people who are involved in that. So I think I will stop at this point of the talk. There's much more that could be said, and I can answer any questions about my book or what I've said right now, or if there's any other questions that you have relating to some of the current social political issues relating to Black Lives Matter or anything else. I'm open for that.
Well, Jazakallah khair, Imam Dawud.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions that people are asking constantly in different areas. But one of the first questions I want to start off with is how do Muslims, in their sense, define justice? And where does social justice fall under the line of overall justice within the framework of a Muslim? And I know you covered some of that, but like in a short explanation, how would you explain that?
Well, social justice is a fairly new term, and you're not going to find that term social justice translated neatly into Arabic, into any of our books of fiqh, or even in usul. You're not going to find it. But as I mentioned, we have the sacred concept, or the sacred mandate, I should say, not concept, the sacred mandate in our deen of al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, which is enjoying the good and forbidding the evil. And this relates to how we should be involved in trying to bring about justice in society. But I think it's important for us to define these terms, which I will try to do very briefly. When we're talking about what we should be enjoining, and this is something that is proactive and something that we are doing that is from the positive. And then the second is the negation, which is that which is trying to prohibit or interrupt from spreading. That al-ma'ruf carries two primary meanings, right? And there's also other shades of meaning, but two primary meanings of al-ma'ruf is al-adl wa tayyib. Al-adl wa tayyib. Al-munkar is the opposite of that, which is al-munkar is the opposite, which is al-dhulm والفحش. So that's what we could say is the opposite. So let me just deal with these terms very, very quickly. Al-adl, which means justice. This is very important for us to understand from an Usuli perspective. What do we say by justice? And there's two different realms. And let's start off with the Shari'i understanding first, coming from our sacred law, is that when things are operating in their proper places that Almighty Allah intended them to function in, this is justice. When people take things outside their proper places that Allah intended them to function in, then that's dhulm, that is injustice, which means that there are some people who could claim something to be an essential human right that maybe is not a God-given right. Right? Likewise, people can deny certain things from a government or from a society, and they say it's not a right, but in fact, it is a God-given human right, right? So we have to be clear, firstly, on this. Then also, at tayyib, you have al-adl tayyib, that which is clean, that which is morally good and what is morally wholesome, right? So these are our definitions. And then there is something relating to mahruf, which is also the urf, or something that's urfi, that relates to, which is a secondary consideration relating to the land and the culture that we live in. But we can't say that culture in and of itself, because something is culturally acceptable in a society, that it overrides our standards of what justice is, that is based upon nusus, where it's based upon the Quran and the authentic ahadith of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is something that I think needs to be very clear. And the munkar is the opposite. And this also relates to not just our goals, but the means, right? So dhulm, again, is when people take things outside of their proper places that Allah intended them to be in from the first level. Of course, there are secular considerations in this as well that come behind this. But the other issue is the indecency, or that which is unwholesome, or al-khubth, right? Which also means that when we go about enjoying the good and forbidding the evil in society, that the means should be wholesome, and they should not be lewd. They should not be profane. We can't justify and say that in order to speak truth to power, that we're going to do things in a profane way, or try to justify vulgarity and other sorts of things like that in so-called being woke or speaking truth to power, right? So I mean, this is a much longer a discussion, and sorry for being short, but actually my book that I wrote, there was a class designed around this book, which is, I've done like in a weekend intensive in Canada as well as here, which is really, it deserves about a good 8 hours to go through the entire book. The book was actually written to be more as a primer, which I have like PowerPoints and a class set up for each chapter of the book, but that's kind of like a short answer.
Another question that we received was really, where do Muslims lie on the political spectrum? I know a lot of Muslims right now are on the left, and that's where they're at, and then they might align with Republicans on the right. But as a Muslim, as Muslim leaders and leadership, how should they engage just wanting the best for the people on all sides of the spectrum, no matter how much they differ, how aggressive they are to us? How does those relationships manifest itself in action?
Well, what I think we need to do, especially in the local levels, I'm not sure how it is there, but we have to mature in setting our priorities. And then when we talk about engagement of officials, be they on the Democrats, Republicans, or independents, I believe we should be starting from the local level first, and then move to the state level and the federal level, not the other way around. but I will suggest something. And again, we should be a people of principles and not personalities. And we should not take, in my opinion, we should not take the so-called progressive platform as a type of a political akida, nor should we take the so-called progressive platform as a type of political akida. We have our own principles, and we operate within those principles, and we weigh things within those parameters. So this is a suggestion, and we study this issue in usul al-fiqh. So there are three basic ways that we can categorize issues. And we should start at the local level, I believe, then the state level, and then we can move to the national level, which then would also include foreign policy issues in this consideration. So there's three levels: ad-dururiyat, wal-hajiyat, wal-tahsiniyat. So these are three levels that we can look at things, right, from an usuli perspective. We have those things that are actually like mandatory, like life or death situations that take highest priorities. Then the second level is al-hajiyat, are those things that are needs that we have that are strong needs based upon difficulties, but they are below that first tier. Then the third level is at-tahsiniyat, those things that help beautify the life and make life and society better, but they don't fall under those other two categories. This is a way we can look at things and prioritize things. And the higher that we go up on the political spectrum on issues, the more mashura, or the more consultation in the Muslim community is needed. And this can't just be simply based upon emotions, but I say we need more shura, or more consultation, because we just can't give ourselves to certain feelings that may, especially out of fear, that may push us to have an exaggerated view about certain things, right? So I mean, I'll just give you a quick example, and this may shock some of you, especially since I work for CARE Michigan. But anti-Muslim bigotry is a major issue in the American Muslim community, no doubt about it. Or some would say Islamophobia. I personally don't even think it's one of the top 3 issues that the Muslim community faces today. I simply don't, right? And I think that there's other issues that we could look at as a community, and it's not saying that we shouldn't work against Islamophobia, but I think that we have some other pressing issues in our community that maybe we might want to look at and prioritize, not only as far as our teachings and what we focus, but even that would perhaps change our political priorities. And I also will say this, that on the right, you have, and I think this is more in state level and definitely more nationally, but you have many people on the right who despise Muslims or loathe Muslims as a type of minority quasi-ethnic identity, basically as a non-white group and seen as a threat to white hegemony and all the values that they center in regards to what they believe is Americanness, which to them really is pegged off of whiteness. That's one group of people. They loathe Muslims. You have another group of people on the left who call themselves progressives, who say that they embrace pluralism and they embrace Muslims as a minority group within their identity politics discourse, their minority politics discourse. But at the same time, they loathe Islamic morality, and they really are against many things that we view sacred. And when the time comes, if we don't submit to all of that which they claim in their pseudo pluralism, because really only pluralism when we agree with their standards of morality on certain things, which a lot of it is really irreverent, that they really don't like what our beliefs. They really don't like traditional Islamic morality. They're actually opposed to it, and they're working to undermine it. So we have one group that really doesn't like Muslims as a non-white group. Then you have another group that really would like to have Muslims change our deen from within, and they really don't like Islam. So, you know, we have to we have to be more sophisticated in our engagement. And I also think, and I'm sorry this is so long, I think that we as Muslims, I think that we have a very special role to play, and we should not see ourselves as a weak people or as a victim people. Many people in the United States of America feel like the political institutions have failed them. The Republican Party has failed them. The Democratic Party has failed them. Not only that, their civic organizations have failed them. Not only that, even their churches and their synagogues have failed them. And they're looking for, I believe many people in America are looking for looking for a different way forward. And I think we Muslims, if we had enough confidence in organizations, we could present a new course to help save America from itself, right? But the question is, do we see ourselves in this type of leadership role, or are we so quick to want to get underneath everyone else's umbrella, right? Because a lot of our political engagement is that we're seeking to be accepted by other people instead of us calling them to a vision and to accept what we're calling them to. See, that's a very different it's a very different mentality between those two, and I think that's the challenge for Muslims going forward in this decade in particular.
Well, we can't move forward without you mentioning those top three issues.
I think that from my perspective, in regards to some of those issues, education is one of the top issues, and not doing our best to influence school boards and influence textbooks and influence curriculum that is actually trying to introduce and normalize immorality to our youth, starting in elementary school. I think this is something that's very important. Like, so we want to bring forth a different type of curriculum and have more accurate history. And at the same time, I think we have to be very careful because what I see right now going on with our young people and going into school, that and there's actually studies on this by Pew, by the way, about the amount of Muslims actually who are born and raised in America who are apostating from Islam. I think that a lot of this has to do with our educational system, especially by the time that people get into to university level, that basically the only thing that is stopping the American Muslim community from atrophy right now, from shrinking, is that the amount of converts that are converting to Islam are replacing those who are leaving Islam. And I think that this is a crisis, right? The second issue I think that we have to address in our community is the marriage crisis. And that's something that's not something that's political per se, but it's an internal issue and an internal challenge about how do we address the marital crisis in our community of so many sisters who are being educated, not finding suitable mates. Some of them who want to get married are staying single, prolonging marriage to the point or not finding suitable mates, real men, I don't mean males, but real men. And some of them are going to the haram and actually being in so-called marriages outside of the faith, which in fact, there is no such thing. It's actually zina. And even if there's a state marriage license. And then the third thing that I would say is that dealing with the issue of which is a broader societal issue, is the issue of the growing use of intoxicants and illegal substances and drugs, at least in my area. I don't know about California, but the opioid crisis and the amount of Muslims that are involved in using drugs and selling drugs in southeastern Michigan, I know in other places like Philadelphia and other places, is actually quite alarming. So I'm I'm frankly, I'm more concerned about that first level. I'm more concerned about our deen and our values being undermined, and immorality being normalized, than anti-Muslim bigots at this point.
Yeah, those are all powerful points, and I definitely agree with you. I mean, right now I'm actually just finishing up my thesis on my master's in education, and it's all around the influence of ideas, that many Muslims face, um, which I don't think a lot of people understand. That I think it's an interesting point, because a lot of people, by the time they graduate from a college education, they don't see how their ideas are influenced. So I think a lot of people come into the social justice work and the realm of doing social justice type of activity, and they have already absorbed frames of references for about 12, 13 years, and it's really hard to break them out of that mold and try to tell them there's a different paradigm or different system or different approach that Islam has, because they've thoroughly been indoctrinated in that sense.
Yeah, and one question, I want to mention something real quick, because a sister asked this question about what's the difference between our mission and the mission of what is quote unquote mainstream liberation mission. And I'm not sure about what mainstream actually means, but I will say this is that it's starting from a different place, talking about the sacred, and we're really talking about people. They're talking about liberation, like being liberated from what? Like, I think a lot of it is actually being liberated, that there are people who want to be liberated from actually sacred values and sacred principles, where everything becomes profane, everything's left up to secular considerations, right? Where literally in the name of individual choice or individual freedoms, it really undermines other people's rights to their own sacred convictions. Right. So, I mean, part of the Black Lives Matter movement, in which they've said, they brought in or mixed in that anti-Black racism can't be challenged or fought without also fighting for the liberation of what they call transsexual or trans liberation. Part of that liberation is literally obliterating the divine construct of gender, obliterating any sort of social or gender differences, to the point that someone could be considering themselves gender fluid and have male genitalia, and then say that they're a woman, and then walk in and use a woman's locker room with my daughter. I mean, that's just one small example, right? Like, I don't want to be liberated from the divine construct of gender. And that has nothing to do with over 400 years of systemic oppression of my people, right? They have nothing to do with each other, right? So, I mean, I think we need to, that's just one small example.
And I think that
gender fluid, the Prophet even no companions were gender fluid. There's something called mukhanathin. Those I'm answering this question. Those are hermaphrodites. Mukhanathin were hermaphrodites. There are people who were born with two different types of genitalia, and the one that was more pronounced was the one that was assigned to the person. There was no gender fluid Sahaba, and people who call themselves transgender now, 99% of them do not fall under the category of hermaphrodites. So we need to clear that up. There were no gender fluid Muslims during the time of that was not something that was seen as an acceptable paradigm by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
And to one of the points that I think the sister added on also, and a few people asked, is if everyone's calling you to a movement, right? I think one of the challenges that many Muslims are called to Black Lives Matter movement, they're called to other movements within the college campuses. Who's establishing the vision for the Muslim approach to social justice, and how you galvanizing and organizing towards that vision? I know CARE might have different chapters and everything, but I think at some point CARE was looked to for social justice type of work. But I think people are still looking for that clarity in the mission and vision and boldness to speak on these issues.
Um, I think that we have a crisis in leadership, and I think that this leadership in organizing has to come from grassroots. It has to come from people who are both grounded in our deen and sacred principles, and also understand the history and the socio-political trends of these United States of America. And I think that really we're playing, in a sense, we're kind of playing, I wouldn't say catch up, but we haven't done a good job of taking shura and benefiting from scholars and activists being in conversations. They're in silos. And then frankly, I think that Black Americans who are Muslims and have been doing grassroots organizing going back to the days of Malcolm, and including Muslims who've not just Nation of Islam, but who are on the Sunnah, I think that it's been a detriment to Muslims and Muslim organizations in general that our opinions were not deferred to or not taken in consideration. And I'm saying this as someone who's been around for a while. Alhamdulillah, I'm on this platform right now, and there's been a lot more discussions, but I clearly remember how things were in the 90s. I clearly remember how things were when major Muslim organizations endorsed George W. Bush, right? I remember these things, and I remember that the voices of African-American leaders and leadership, including from the Jama'ah of Imam Wafdi Muhammad, rahmatullahi alayhi, we weren't listened to, right? And I think as a community, I think we paid the consequences for that. And I think we're still paying some of the consequences of that right now. And I think there's a way of reconciling that.
So can you read the sister's question on your side?
What is that? Aren't the foundation of Islam bringing peace and ensuring justice? When those who identify as trans women are being raped and murdered, shouldn't our priority of Muslims be to fight for their lives and to focus on their identity? Yeah, see, there's a difference between, and I want to make this clear, right? So I think this kind of conflating two things. So as a general principle, we as Muslims are against anyone being murdered or killed. Right? Let not anyone kill a soul unjustly, right? So that's whether the person identifies as trans or not. We're against violence of all people, right? And this is something that's very clear. And we should be, for anyone's rights, not to be brutalized or not to be killed. And we can do that without affirming that which goes against our sacred law. See, it's not those aren't mutually exclusive propositions, right? Those aren't mutually exclusive propositions. But I wish we were so concerned about all the other people who identify with their birth gender, who are murdered in the streets in Watts, in South Central LA, in South Side Chicago, in West Side Detroit. I wish we were so concerned about that. I'll stop with that.
So we're coming to the last few minutes. I think my final question is, for all the Muslims out there, they're looking to organize, looking to work on certain issues. Right now, many people are trying to address issues related to Black Lives Matter, and they're trying to join the movement. But as a whole, what's your suggestion to Muslims that are trying to work in the realm of social justice? Where should their starting point be? And what are some action steps you would call them to?
First, we have to learn our deen. These things that have gone on to Black people, to my people, they've gone on since before I was born. They've gone on since before my father was born. They've gone on since my grandfather was born. We have cameras now and see some of these things. These things are going on, aren't new. And anti-Black racism cannot be legislated nor adjudicated away. No set of laws can stop anti-Black racism in America or court cases on their own. Why? Because we have cultural racism, and cultural racism is informed by diseased hearts. So again, if we want to be truly involved in transformation of the society, we have to learn our deen properly. And I seriously think that we've given ourselves more to a lot of social sciences and things like critical theory than we've even studied the usul of our own religion. And I think that's highly problematic. So that's one thing. The second thing is consult with your own Black brothers and sisters who are Muslims. And if you're talking about helping Black people, it would make sense to start in your own community and taking shura from the people in your community who are Black, so that you share the same faith with. And I will even go point that it's improper adab to jump over your Black Muslim brothers and sisters in organizing, to jump over to people who aren't Muslims. So people are so quick to want to jump to Black Lives Matter and say they want to have solidarity. What about having some authentic relationships with Black people in your own community? And what about having some humility and taking the lead from your Black brothers and sisters in Islam, right? I think that's a very good starting point. And then they can point you towards what grassroots activities that are going on in the community led by Muslims or that are not Muslims, who are actually funded by the Black community, not funded by major corporations or foundations that also have other agendas, right? Who actually, that the grassroots people know, and actually who are working on the grassroots level, right? So a lot of this is not just getting out in the streets right now, though. I've been involved in many protests. I've organized and been co-organized as a protest. Like, I'm not against protesting, right? Definitely not. And, but I do believe that there's some foundational work that we have to be done, that we have to do. And we may feel like we're in the urgency of now, or the urgency of this moment, that we have to like go out in the streets or do this or do that. And I'm saying, I think we should have a little caution and take a deep breath and kind of like get ourselves together and get ourselves more grounded as Muslims, especially Muslims who aren't Black, to be quite frank. The other thing is, there are organizations that are putting out legislation, that are putting out policy suggestions regarding legislation and action alerts. I know that Karen in California is one of those. And I would suggest that when they put out those things that relate to taking away funds from police departments that are involved in upkeeping militarized equipment or being trained by a particular foreign military, or working to disband police unions that have helped to protect bad cops and things like this, to act on those action alerts, to write your Congress people, senators, state legislatures, local city councils, to write them, to call them. And if you're able to show up for commission meetings at the police department when some of these things are going forward, to actually show up. So there's many different ways. There's money that can be given, there's calls that can be made. So there's a number of ways of engaging besides protesting. But I think that a lot of what we need to do starts from a foundationary level. I think that we have to go back and um, recommit ourselves to learning the foundations of our deen and learning them from qualified teachers, to be quite frank, because many of us didn't grow up with that. But alhamdulillah, we have more of that now. And to establish some like authentic relationships with African Americans who are part of the Muslim community. I think those are good places to start.
Jazakallah khair for those points. And those are all very important. And I call everyone to remember to check out the book, Towards Sacred Activism. And you know, when I was in high school, we had a book that covered a lot of similar concepts too, which I think is everyone should check out, which is Imam Jamil's book, Revolution by the Book. And it's very interesting to see his transformation, you know, moving from just a sort of a Marxist sort of framework and then move into an Islamic framework, and some of the things that he highlights. Before we end, I think, okay, he responded. A few people, if they want to reach out to you, is that email good to share with everyone?
Yes, fine. I have an admin person, but I get a hold of the emails, so it depends on like how busy I am. So if it takes me 2 or 3 days to respond back, please pardon me, but I'm kind of I'm very busy these days. But for those who are not just the sister here, may Allah bless her, but for others who are asking, I would suggest that before asking me any specific questions, I suggest purchasing Towards Sacred Activism. And that can be purchased on meccabooks.com or on Amazon. And that book is a labor of love, by the way. Like I'm plugging it because I think it will be helpful. And I haven't gotten a single dime from that book from the publishers, by the way. So it's not about an issue of me making money, just to let you know. So purchase the book, and you can go to Mecca Books and get a copy. It's cheaper on Mecca Books than on Amazon. But if you want quicker delivery, you have Amazon Prime, to go to Amazon Prime and you can get the book.
And it's would you suggest a good curriculum piece for a lot of those Muslim schools and everything to start to incorporate in their curriculum?
Yes, that is one book. And also Sheikh Omar Suleiman has a 40 hadith on activism. And he has a book coming out soon that is relating to activism, similarly to the book that I have out right now. So that's another book. You mentioned Imam Jamil El-Amin's book. And I would also say, if you haven't read it, I think that everyone who's serious about being involved in activism in America should do a critical study of the life of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayh, that we know better as Malcolm X. And I think that you will see some of the things that he warned against are relevant for us today. Read his autobiography, listen to the speech, Message to the Grassroots in particular, and also know that Malcolm, he stood against, he was committed to fighting white supremacy and imperialism. He also called his people to do better. And he never compromised morality, right? So he was for public justice and for public morality, right? And I suggest those who celebrate and talk about the greatness of Malcolm X to really study the complete Malcolm. Just don't cherry pick Malcolm as some anti-imperialist, almost Marxist type of figure. That's not the sum of what Malcolm was, not only in the nation, but when he left the nation in that very last year of his life.
Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, thank you for your wisdom and your and just being outspoken on this topic. I think a lot of Muslim social justice activists have picked a side and just have completely abandoned a lot of key issues that are at the foundation of of Islam. So inshallah, we'll continue this conversation, and then hopefully after this pandemic, we'll invite you back to Southern California in person one of these days. You get to hang out at the beach and teach, inshallah. So jazakallah khair, and I pray Allah gives you success in your work.
Ameen, ameen, ameen.